I will go ahead and introduce Dr. Jill Morris. Dr. Jill is an extramural program director at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. As a program director, she is responsible for a research portfolio of multiple rare neurological disorders, including adult polyglucosan body disease. Prior to coming to the NIH, she was an assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University. Dr. Morris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So you can see my slides fine? Great. So I first of all want to thank the foundation and Natasha for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak with you. I think advocacy engagement with NIH is extremely important, and I'm glad that we're starting down that path. So my talk, I'm going to give a little bit of background on myself, just because, so you know that I have a background in science, and that I'm just not an administrator, and because that would make me cringe, you know, if you didn't think I had a background in science, and then I'm going to talk briefly about what my role is, and just so that both the advocacy and early stage investigators are aware of the role that a program director has in funding, and then talk about some NINDS funding opportunities that would be specifically geared towards would be of interest for your group, your team. So after my postdoctoral fellowships, I was a senior staff fellow at NIH, at NINDS. I was involved in the identification of the Niemann-Pick type C gene. And then from there, I actually went to Merck for a while. I went into industry for a period of 5 years. I worked under Chris Austin, who was the head of NCATS for a while, and decided then to go into academics. So I went to Northwestern for a period of 8 years. And I was speaking to, in our meet and greet earlier today, I was speaking about the fact that I found myself, I don't like competition in science. And so I like my role better as being able to help scientists achieve their goals. And I get just as much pleasure, well, probably not as much as the grantee, but I get a lot of pleasure out of seeing people get their grants funded and allowing for their work to be able to progress. So the mission of NINDS is to seek the fundamental knowledge about the brain and nervous system, and to use that knowledge to reduce the burden of neurological disease. And I encourage you, we have a website that talks about our news events, that will talk about new funding opportunities that come out. It will talk about new data that has been generated from one of our funded PIs. And Walter Korschutz, often who's our leader, will put out director's messages about funding opportunities. So NINDS, just a little background, is divided into the Division of Extramural Research and the Division of Intramural Research. And a lot of people find this a bit confusing. So when I was working on Niemann-Pick, I worked in intramural research, which is essentially just like any other academic organization. So they run just like any other university, where they're all doing their individual research, but they don't have to apply for NIH grants, but they are independent researchers. So the Division of Extramural Research is where the majority of funds that we get from Congress goes. And that's the funding of everyone else across the country and sometimes across the world. And so that is the responsibility of our group. So I have, the way that NINDS does, and every institute is different, is that I'm in the Division of Neuroscience, and we're assigned specific disease areas as well as basic areas. And what this allows is that even though we have the Division of Neuroscience, we have the Division of Translational Research and the Division of Clinical Research, I will always be your contact. So if you're applying for a grant that is being facilitated by the Division of Translational Research. I will be on those calls along with the program staff from our translational group. So I will always be that point of contact that will get you connected with the right person at NINDS, and we will work together as a team to move the research forward. So one of my jobs is I act as a steward for a scientific area. So I interact with investigators and facilitate funding. And just to think about the grant cycle, so this is your typical grant cycle from the PI developing a research proposal all the way through review to award being made. So just, and this is brief, just to go through what my role is it's good to speak with, especially if you're an early stage investigator, to speak with a program director early. So I speak with applicants about their proposal, determine if NINDS is an appropriate institute. If not, I will help discuss with other institutes, help identify the appropriate mechanism. So there's many different mechanisms people can apply to depending on what they're proposing, and then help them select the study section where the application will be reviewed. And NINDS participates in all of the standard, so the parent R01s and R21s, which, you know, the vast majority of grants come through. And then we also have grants, which I'll be talking about in our translational group, small business awards, as well as our clinical trial grants. So after the grant is submitted, I listen to the study section review. This is really helpful for me to see if, you know, for example, there might be, the study section may be divided into two groups. One group thinks a concern is a major, and others think it's a minor concern or can be addressed. And it's very helpful also to get a sense of the enthusiasm by the reviewers, which isn't always reflected in the summary statement. So it's very helpful for me to listen to the review. And then I discuss the summary statement with an applicant and help them determine what's the best path forward. The majority of grants get reviewed by the Center for Scientific Review, which is completely separate from NINDS. NIH keeps review and funding institutes separate so that there's no conflict of interest. So I don't play any role in the review of the application, the assignment of reviewers, the writing of the summary statement. For example, if an application isn't discussed because only the top 50% get discussed, I don't know what the concerns are until the summary statement comes out. So review is done by a completely separate group of people. Then after it's reviewed, we actually have 4 pre-council meetings. So we're having council next week, and we just finished our last pre-council meeting last week. We're having our council meeting next week. We had our last pre-council meeting last week, where we go through grants, discuss the strengths and weaknesses, and then make funding recommendations to council members, as well as give out merit awards, make nominations for merit awards. So then it's presented to council, and then after it's approved by council, we go through the administrative review, where we make sure that you have all your animal approvals, human subjects approvals, and don't have any overlap with other funded awards. So this isn't an isolated process. So we interact along the way with other institutes. We interact within NINDS, you know, it's a collaborative process to work with investigators. So another major role that I have is I interact with advocacy like you, and one thing we do is we hope to share important information, website information about the disease. So if our information on our website is out of date, we ask for expertise from the advocacy community and clinicians in the area to update, you know, the website information, help identify new funding opportunities. We like to get the patient perspective because there may be things that we're missing and gaps in the research that need to be addressed. We can be involved in coordinating conference and workshop planning, strategic planning, and then coordinated funding. So there are cases where, like a program project grant where the advocacy group will provide co-funding for one of the projects. Or there are situations where a patient organization can pick up a grant that wasn't funded by NIH. Also, my role is to identify gaps in the research and to hold workshops and develop initiatives. So I do have administrative roles. I review progress reports, do press releases when someone has a really good scientific publication. And I always encourage people to contact us if they have a publication coming out so we can do a press release. And then for grants that are U grants, which are cooperative agreements, I'm involved in regularly scheduled calls, review milestones, et cetera. And lastly, we do respond to Congress. So a few times a year, we have a whole office that is involved with interacting with Congress and goes down to the Hill frequently. We ourselves can't lobby, but we do respond to language from Congress. And that is a significant part of our job. We have trans NINDS activities as well as interacting across NIH. And so, for example, things like the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network. So just talk about funding opportunities. I mentioned that we do all of the parent mechanisms, but we also have a focus on the translational programs and clinical trial readiness. So this is a future funding opportunity that isn't out yet, and I presented it to council. So if you want to know what new opportunities, funding opportunities will be coming out, a little trick is to listen to the open session of council. These are video casts. You can re-listen to them because they're available publicly after council has occurred. But during the open session of council, we're required to present any new funding opportunities that will be coming out by NINDS. And so if you want to get a heads up about a new funding opportunity, that's the first start point, because that's the first time we talk about it. But we identified that there was a gap when it came to ultra rare diseases, and that was in the natural history studies and identifying clinical outcome assessments. So we proposed to council, and they approved, to develop a funding opportunity to identify and evaluate the utility of clinical outcome assessments that we use to determine efficacy in clinical trials for ultra rare diseases. And we felt this addressed a gap. So we have funding opportunities through our translational group to develop candidates. We have the clinical trial mechanisms, but we didn't have, for ultra rare space, a way to fund natural history studies. And so this is a funding opportunity that will be coming out. So we're defining an ultra rare disease as, so the US doesn't have official definition, but we are using a definition from Europe that affects 1 in 50,000 persons, which is essentially 6,500 individuals in the US. So anything below that is an ultra rare disease. The initiative will allow both retrospective and prospective natural history, and innovative and efficient study design. We want the community to be involved, and encourage the use of existing infrastructure, collaboration, and resources. And obviously the appropriate statistical challenges, because there are a lot of challenges with doing natural history for ultra rare disease. And we like for these to be for disorders where it's foreseen that there's going to be a clinical trial in the near future. So this will be coming out. I'm not allowed to say when, but we're working on this, and just wanted to give you a heads up. We already have a clinical trial readiness for validation of outcome measures, and this is when you have already identified an outcome or a biomarker and you want to validate it across multiple sites. So that is one of our funding opportunities. And then we have a suite of biomarker programs, and sometimes these are for more of the common disorders, but we do see rare disorder groups come in. for discovery of biomarkers, validation of a biomarker, and then analytical validation, so validation of the assay, and then multi-site clinical validation of a biomarker candidate. So then we have a suite of translational programs from early stage translation, so assay development, all the way to the late stage clinical development. And I'm just going to briefly go through these, and I will give my slides to Natasha after. I will send them to her, so anybody who wants to get the close-up view will have access. I do encourage you very much so to, if you Google or you use this address below, NINDS Translational Research, you'll come to this page. And if you click on join our listserv, you'll get emails. And the advantage is that we have individual webinars for each funding opportunity. And there you can get an in-depth view of what you need to apply for a funding opportunity. So I highly, highly encourage people to join that listserv. So we have a suite of early translational opportunities, which we call Ignite. And there's 3 funding opportunities. The budget for these is $750,000 for the whole award period. It's a 3-year award, so it's typically $250,000 per year. And one is for neurotherapeutic agent characterization and in vivo efficacy. One's for assay development, and the other one is to make a better model to show target engagement. All of our mechanisms in the translational program are milestone awards, and people look at milestones awards. So what can happen, this is a phased award, R61, R33. What can happen is if you don't reach a milestone at the end of the R61 award, the grant can end. But there is an advantage to having a phased milestone award. And the advantage is that reviewers will realize that this could be a high risk project and that they're willing to take the risk because they know that federal funds won't be committed for the whole time period if it ends up that it's just not going to work. So you can look at it 2 ways. And one way is the positive, that you can come in with a very innovative method, and reviewers will know that if in the first 1 or 2 years it doesn't work out, but if it does work out, you get to move on to the second phase of the award. I'll go through these briefly because I'm concerned about time, but the in vivo therapeutic agent characterization and in vivo efficacy. So let's say if you were doing gene therapy, you had an initial vector, or you were going to modify the vector, that would be in the first phase. And then let's say a dose finding study in the second phase of the award. So there has to be novelty, a significant improvement over existing therapies, strong biological rationale, and relevance for therapy development. For the assay development, again, with the phased award, it could be you develop the assay in the phase 1 of the award, the R61 phase, and then you actually do a screen in the R33 phase of the award. And then finally, we have the developing a validation of a model system and our pharmacodynamic markers. One example for here is like if you had a mouse model and you were putting in like a luciferase assay to show target engagement of the drug target, that would be an example of coming in for that mechanism. So we do have later stage awards. Our Blueprint program is a big area. And all of these that I'm going to talk about have the same infrastructure. So Blueprint has 9 participating ICs that all have a neurologic disease interest. NINDS runs the program and does the review of the applications. So we just launched the biologics. And this can be both not early discovery, but discovery where you still have some work to do, and late stage development. So the investigator comes in and they have the disease expertise, they have the models, they have the assays, but we provide them with consultants who have industry expertise, and we also provide them with industry contract services. And then in the end, for all of these programs, I'll talk about the investigator maintains the intellectual property. That our goal is to get a success and for you to go into the clinic. So how this works is that we provide the group with, so the principal investigator can do all the disease specific activities, but we would provide you contracts to do the manufacturing. So this can be manufacturing of ASOs or gene therapy vector, do the tox studies and animal models, and then it can actually move directly then into a clinical trial. And so you may be an expert in the disease, but don't have this industry expertise, and we provide that for you. We have the same exact set of programs for neurotherapeutics, so small molecules. So the biologics, and then we have the same exact framework for the small molecules. I'm not going to talk about the devices, but I'll kept the slide in here for whoever wants a copy of the slides, but we have a whole suite of programs for translation of devices. And then I wanted to highlight, it's a new program called Ultra Rare Gene Based Therapy Network, or URGENT. And this just started, this program, and it has the same framework, except it has what's called an EXO-1. So you can, so the idea is this is for ultra rare diseases where you know what the mutation is. It's for biologics. So it can be gene therapy, it can be antibodies, it can be ASOs. You can apply for EXO-1s, which are individual elements. So you could apply for a planning grant to help plan your project, and we provide you with access to expertise. Or you can apply for EXO-1 to do the pharmacology, the manufacturing, or you can apply to the UO1, where you apply for the whole suite of contracts. And then again, in a separate budget, we would move it directly into clinical trial if everything moves well. And this is a relatively new program. It's a very new program. And if you're interested, you know, we can have a call with Chris Boshoff, who runs the program. We have, I have multiple advocacy groups that started their own small business. Just so you know, small business programs is a completely separate set of money. So there's no competition with academic researchers and small businesses, but I've had many family members who start a small business and get, you know, multiple awards funded and moving towards the clinic. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was the RDCRN. So NINDS is the biggest co-funder of the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network with NCATS. So this is a program of 20 consortia and a data coordinating center. And each consortia comes in and they're studying 3 related diseases. NINDS is co-funding 11 of the 20, and we're also co-funding the data coordinating center. So we're a huge participant in this program. And so the next round, so NCATS recently published an notice of intent to publish, that the next round of applications will be due in December of 2024. So you could see maybe it's just a suggestion coming in with 3 glycogen storage diseases and applying for an award. The reason we like to tell people ahead of time is these are huge grants, and Michio has a lot of experience writing these, and it takes a lot of planning. So it's good to know well ahead of time that something is going to be coming out, because you have to plan well ahead of time to get these applications together. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. Hopefully I didn't go over.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Morris. We're right on time, and we have time for just a couple questions. I see one here in the chat, clarifying question. Are the NINDS grant resubmissions presented to the same reviewers?
Oh, so CSR, it's a Center for Scientific Review, doesn't necessarily give it it will go back to the same study section, but it doesn't necessarily go to the same reviewers. And so it depends on reviewer availability. They might be taking a cycle off because they're themselves are writing a grant. The previous reviewer may have been ad hoc. So there's no guarantee, but you can get the same reviewers.
Great. I see another question. Can small companies leverage the NeuroNext network for clinical studies? Also, can foreign companies and investigators apply for NINDS funds?
Yes, to both. So foreign investigators can apply, and small businesses can access the NeuroNext.
Great. We have one more question before I'll move on to the final closing remarks, which is how early in the proposal development process should a potential investigator approach a program officer?
Yeah, so for things like the translational programs, I would say early, because we can tell you. So we have forms that we have you fill out to tell us where you're at, and then we'll have a call, and we can tell you, we think you're ready or not. So for urgent, for example, we encourage people to have already talked to the FDA, so that they know exactly what they need to move to the clinic and what outcome measures they need. For a regular R01, don't wait till 2 weeks before the deadline. So, I would say, at least try to, especially if you're going, so if you're anything over 500,000, you need approval beforehand. So that you definitely want to do a couple months before, because it takes a while to get approval. But yeah, the earlier the better, I would say.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Morris. We really appreciate your time. This was incredibly informative.